webinar is now streaming on Facebook and we are live. All right. Hey guys, this is, I can't believe it. It's like the 4th episode of Stay Wild Child. And I am excited today. Cindy is joining us, and it's kind of a funny little story. So Cindy and I, we met each other through a business, a supplement that I sell as part of a direct sales business. And Cindy was doing the same thing. She started taking the supplement and started feeling good. And so we became friends on Facebook. And I noticed, I don't know, a few years ago, I was like, what is she talking about? She was saying these things on Facebook, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting and kind of strange, and what all is she talking about? And so interesting, because I started kind of getting into, I started waking up myself, and I started stepping into awareness, and I started, listening to different teachers, and doing some deep healing and lots of work on myself. And then I kind of started reading some of Cindy's stuff again, and I'm like, oh, okay. It was interesting because it was like I could finally like hear it or see it, or I don't know exactly how all that works. But so I reached out to Cindy, and I'm like, hey, I think we might be on similar paths. And so, yeah, and so she is just such an amazing person, and I'm so honored to have her on Stay Wild Child and this episode. And so, Cindy, I'll let you take just a minute and kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll jump in and kind of start going back and forth with some questions. Does that sound good?
Sure, it sounds great. But first, I just wanted to say thank you, Nicole, for having me on the show. And mostly I really truly believe in your message, remembering who we are. And I can totally relate to that. So thank you. But in essence, my story is quite simple. I think most light workers in general, I kind of identified as both light worker and light warrior at once, have difficult paths that, we must overcome. And so not everyone, but a good majority of us do. And so my story sort of evolved from there, from childhood. I unfortunately was a victim to my childhood for a very long time. I couldn't get past that emotional box. And so what happened over time is my life would continuously throw me these curveballs. And that's what's supposed to happen when you don't let go of something. And so as my life got progressively worse, I would just take a baseball bat and swing at whatever came at me. And I would pat myself on the back every time I overcame a great big situation. Yay! Until I think the situations kept getting worse. And for me, that led to the eventual death of my son. And that began a long process of self-discovery, of awakening, of really diving deep into the stories and really finding ourselves until we have peace. And so for me, I think that's kind of where I've evolved from. I've come from the darkest areas that you can imagine. And because I am no longer emotionally attached to those places, I'm able to help others as they come to me for advice or just situations in general. A lot of times people say to me, your insight, like, I just need your insight. And I kind of smile, but I gained that insight from being meshed in this dream life, is what I call it,
Right. Absolutely. So talk just a little bit, Cindy. I want to go back just a bit. So I like the analogy that you just used of like you were taking a baseball bat and like swinging it, right? And tackling life that way, because, it's like, I don't, for a lot of us, we don't learn these skills as a young person to dig deep and look at situations. And you're just like, okay, like just tackle that problem and like move on. But then a lot of times we find like those patterns, like they just kind of continue to repeat. And so at what point, so I know that you lost your son, and I know that that's, something that we have in common, because I've lost a child as well. At how many years ago was that?
It was a good 12, 14 years ago. But I spent about 8 to 10 years in full-on depression, like full on. And when I say this, I say most people take medication to numb themselves. Well, I figured out a way how to numb myself without any drugs. I just kind of close everything out, and I would leave my body in a way, and I was there, but I wasn't there. It was like this shell that existed on robot mode for a long time. I know the grief stages very well. I know the anger stage. I know the blame everyone else. I know all of these stages quite well. And I think the patterns that develop, I've begun to understand because I developed an understanding of conscious mirrors. And the conscious mirrors to me is everything in life, because in reality, everything in 3D is literally just a snapshot of our state of mind. And that's why it's so illusory in nature, right? Because it looks very real, but it is a temporary state. And what happens a lot of the times in these patterns is we get so focused on what has happened in the past that we continue to perpetuate a pattern based on the fact that we're looking backwards instead of forward. And so we haven't learned, and there goes the pattern, and we stay in it. And what happened, the people look different, but it's always the same situation over and over again until we get past it,
Right. So what do you think were some of the key factors in helping you realize that you were repeating these patterns, and what helped you, losing a child for a lot of people, it can, so it took you a long time to overcome that. And I don't think that you ever overcome it, but you're able to look back probably in a different way now than you were at one point. And so what are some of the things that helped you in overcoming that deep despair, that deep depression? Was it a person? Was it a somebody that you followed? Was it what happened?
Okay, so that's kind of a unique story in itself. I had a lot of help from the spiritual world. I've always had gifts, always, always, always. I've heard mostly the spiritual world. I'm called clairaudient.
Okay.
And in the middle of all that grief, I could still hear the spirit world very clearly. And one of these nights, I was sitting in the dark because that's what I preferred to do. I just wanted to sit in the dark, just leave me alone. I'd put my daughter to bed, and I would sit there, and I wouldn't sleep. I'd just sit in the dark. And so when I started hearing the voices and talk to me and all this stuff, I would ignore it. It would make me angry because I didn't want anything to do with my gifts in the moment. I was just lost in my despair. And it was one of those nights where I was sitting there and the voice insisted, take the picture now. And it would not leave me alone, to the degree where I was so angry and frustrated. I picked up what was a Nextel flip phone at the time and flipped it over and was so angry. I was talking to thin air. I must have looked ridiculous to anyone else because only I can hear the voice. And I said, fine, you want me to take this picture? Fine. And I snapped it. And that's when I really looked at the picture. And in that moment, what I saw was my son's light body right next to mine. And I realized in that moment, the biggest lesson that I had to learn was that in death, what separates us is our illusion of this body. And that my son was standing next to me the whole time, and that the grief that I was feeling was because I was misinterpreting the fact that he was standing right next to me. Because we don't see this body. And even then, with my physical senses, I did not see this light. I had to take this camera picture to prove it to myself.
Right.
And that was the beginning of realizing that I needed to snap out of this pattern. I needed to, get up, that I was stuck in this misery, that I stood still while the rest of the world was moving, progressing, and going on without me. And it was a very difficult awakening because there were parts of me that had been numb for so long that when I looked up, my nieces and nephews had grown up without me. It was almost as if I had walked out and walked back into my body in that moment. So that was the beginning of my search, is realizing that there were things that I could not see, that I could not explain with my rational mind. And I think that's where I decided to turn the trajectory and start looking on my own. And I discovered a lot of different paths and teachers along the way. But I was getting a lot of help from the spiritual world. You know, like I would have guidance, read this book, you know, grab this, grab that, you know. And so for me, there's a lot of influences. There are some spiritual books of people who have passed away and moved on and come back, just so that my mind could wrap what the spiritual world was like, so I could enter it. Sure. Then there was, you know, all the positive teachers. I think a lot of them I was already listening but not listening, sure. Like Abraham Hicks.
Yeah.
Like I loved what she had to say in theory, but couldn't apply it, you know, as an example. At first, it's a totally different scenario now, but that's what it was at first. Neville Goddard was a huge, huge influence, but so is the spiritual movement that occurred 200 years ago, the science of the mind. So your biggest influencers would be like Ernest Holmes, Joseph Murphy, Charles Haniel, Mary Baker Eddy, Nona Brooks. A lot of people have no idea who these people were, but there are founding fathers of the movement that's going on right now, the awakening, the global awakening of us realizing, you know, that we're the source of our reality, that 3D is this illusion we're making up, that none of it is real. The breaking of the patterns, I think the best way that I ever broke this pattern of victimhood, you could say, because that's where I was stuck, right? In victimhood.
Sure.
Was, for me, was realizing that I played all the parts. That every person around me was a representation of the thoughts that I had in the moment and how I judged them. And that even though I wasn't physically in those bodies were showing me what I was thinking out loud. And so that sort of started breaking up patterns for me, and I started picking out things and saying, you know, and I think that's what really got me going on this path. It got me excited about helping other people was, oh my gosh, I figured out how to see 3D and how to change it and manipulate it. And I understand Abraham Hicks all of a sudden, and then I understood everyone else all of a sudden. And it just kind of grew and progressed from there, you know?
That's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned Abraham Hicks. I was probably introduced to her probably 5 years ago, and I listened and I'm like, what is this? Like, it just sounded kind of gibberish to me. Like I couldn't understand it. And then I listened, you know, I stepped back in, you know, maybe like 3 years ago and started listening. I'm like, oh, well, why did I think it sounded like gibberish before? But you just, I wasn't aware enough, right, to understand any of it. And so it just takes practice, right? Just keep kind of taking those steps forward. So do you mind explaining clairaudient just a little bit for those who maybe aren't familiar with that term?
So I have a unique story about that, and it's brief and short.
Sure.
So the funny thing about clairaudience is we literally hear voices, you know? Right. So the funny thing about that, if you really think about it, is that's kind of the definition for schizophrenia, all sorts of things, right? And so for the longest time, and this is an important part of my evolution, I was afraid to even tell people that I heard voices, because society said by definition that meant that I was not 100% there.
Right.
But it took a very interesting, I was searching at the time, maybe 10, 12 years ago, and I met this psychic, and the very first thing he said to me, and you know, he didn't know me from Adam, but he had a conversation with a spirit, very vocal conversation with what looked like thin air, and I could have judged him as well and said, well, this man just looks like he's insane talking to the spirit world. But in the end, he turned around, he looked me in the eyes, and he said, I need you to know that the voices are real and that you hear the spirit world. And that is why spirits are drawn to you, because you can be this bridge that sort of, you know, conveys what people cannot see. And that was kind of part of my journey in accepting that gift. And now I tell everyone, oh yeah, I'm clairaudient.
Yeah, that's right. Right. You're like, own it.
On other decibels. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that makes me happy. So, so right now, I think where I'm at in my journey is I definitely know. I mean, I check in and I meditate and I listen, and I think that at this moment I'm probably judging where my gifts fall. And once I release that judgment, then they'll be a lot more apparent, because, we have this mind that try to rationalize everything. And I'm assuming you're hearing the voices like inside, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yes. So it varies a little bit. It varies a little bit, but it is an inner hearing. And all of our senses are really inner hearings. They're more advanced than what we see on the outside. What we see on the outside is very limited.
Right.
It's like this limited box, but from the inside. And that was actually one of the greatest things I learned about seeing too, is that I used to envy these people that could keep their eyes open and say that they see spirits, because I didn't understand the connection. So I always said, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't see spirits. But what I discovered is the second I close my eyes, I can see spirits too,
Right.
And so it was an evolution of your inner seeing, your inner hearing, your inner knowing,
Yes.
for sure.
Absolutely. And we all have a different gift, and a lot of people have a tremendous amount of them. And then also we rationalize things with our logical brain. And I think that, I guess just where I am in my evolving is, I haven't quite gotten past the judgment of all of that. And I think that probably at some point, part of that was shut down for me. But it's coming. It's releasing that limited thinking and expanding my mind. And, not everything is so black and white, basically.
For me, one of those things that really truly helps in a similar capacity to this is that the hardest and easiest thing to grasp is if I'm seeing it outside of me directly, it is coming from me. So these gifts are actually me and I'm not aware of it. And so then when I study the reflection outside of me, I'm able to integrate it back in and say, okay, I must be the source. Let me find this part of my brain that can do this and that thinks it is appearing outside. Because all people appearing outside are really just serving as messengers for our inner capacity. So, if you notice,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah. If you notice, a lot of the times what we do is we sort of, we start to evolve and we start to lose certain friends because we've evolved, right? And then we enter into a new world where everyone appears like future me now,
Yes.
that is the first indication that is you now. And this is your evolution, and it's appearing outside because you have not yet identified that it is actually you. And that sort of helps release that judgment and start taking ownership back and integrating those skills.
Absolutely. God, you're so freaking brilliant. I love it. Every single time I ask you a question, you come back with something that's it's just so easy. You just give great little bites, because every time I've asked you something, you've always come back with, thank you for being that reflection for me. So I'll ask you the question, and then you're throwing it right back at me like I'm supposed to give you that answer because I'm serving as your mirror as well, which is just, I love it. I love the way that, so I love the evolution that you've released judgment about so many things. That's the part that I kind of still challenge myself about quite often. When did that start to happen for you? Was it just because you were able to look at everything as a mirror?
So that sort of happened by accident. Well, not accident. I guess you could say there's no accidents, right? But one of the things that just, the guidance that I was given from my spiritual realm was start listening to books at night and I know you're trying to read them during the day, but just play them in your sleep. And so I started doing that consistently. It'd be the same books or a list of books or a playlist or whatever, but just kept playing them. And I would even turn them off during the day. And what happened was this magical evolution of thought, of witnessing my entire brain as I once thought it was being completely rewired into a new way of thinking. And I had these really magical spiritual moments in which I was shown repeatedly, everyone is you. Everyone is you. To the degree now that when I feel strife or an argument coming on or some form of pain that I don't want to acknowledge that someone's shining a light on the other side, I've gotten to the point that I appreciate it now more than ever, because in actuality, it's helping me. I'm the one that needs to release the pain in order to see what's being conveyed. And so the judgment sort of became more of an evolution of accepting everything in front of me. If it's in front of me, it's me, it's me, it's me. And that includes the stuff I don't want to look at. Sure. Or the stuff that I've evolved from, right?
Yeah.
And it's more ownership, even when you don't want to own it.
Right.
Like
that's the hard part.
Times, right? I don't want to own that.
Right. Yeah. That's the hard part, girl. Right. That can't be me, right? How many of us reach out to you and say, there's no way. That can't be me.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of times I'll say to them, okay, if it's not you, then it's me. You know what I mean? But you brought it to me and I'll take it. But it's more of a, the minute you own it, you're free of it. You're no longer its slave, you're its master. And so that for me was very helpful in the transition. I'm somewhat of a control freak. I like to control what's going on around me. And so it's like, okay, one way of looking at it, I'm helpless to the circumstance. And one way of looking at it, I'm the master of the circumstance. And so it was more of a conscious choice over and over again. I got to own it if I want to overcome it.
Yeah. I love the way that you can switch your way of looking at things. It's just fantastic. So this learning at night, which you've mentioned to me a handful of times, it's I know they mentioned this in the Biology of Belief. I think that's the name of the book, but it's subconscious programming, right? Is that what it is?
Well, you went brief a little bit, but yes, I think so. In terms of the programming at night, it's based on Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton. But the funny thing is, my intuition on this occurred before I heard these recordings and these suggestions. So I was already doing it, and then all of a sudden, books come out to prove. And I think that's been part of my evolution too. And the most exciting part of my journey, and the reason that I realized that 3D is really this malleable illusion, is that I literally witnessed the books and the contents that I've put into my life become other people, places, and things conveying these messages. So like, for example, the Neville Goddard and Neville Goddard School, well, I've just, I've created this whole, now thanks to this reading, I've stepped into a reality where there's hundreds of Neville followers seeking, their own self-empowerment. With the Course in Miracles, that programming, what it allowed me to do was take ownership of my world and see that everyone was me pushed out, because the Course, all that it does is take 365 days to reprogram your mind.
Right.
It undoes the illusion that, and you have funny little exercises at the time. Like day one exercise could be an example, like, look at the dresser and then say that is not a dresser. Well, that's not a nonsensical little exercise. You don't think of, doing that, but it makes you do that. So you look around, that's not a table, that's not a bed, that's not a house, that's not a whatever. And that's the end of the exercise for 5 minutes. And then you go on to another version of that, and you do these exercises for 365 days until suddenly you see another world, which is kind of what happened with me. It's like I transversed the veil from looking at things outside of me to looking at it from within. And there's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Ready to be there. And yeah, I'm always in awe of the place that you are on the bridge, and the knowing that you have and the gifts that you share with so many people. Talk just a little bit about, so I know that you're this, you've made some big changes over the last several months. And so talk just a little bit about that, and kind of what made you take those steps forward, and not necessarily seeing the whole path, but like you've just kind of started walking. Talk just a little bit about some of that.
Sure, for sure. So this is kind of a fun part. This is the only place in my life where fear dictated, and where I allowed the circumstances to control my destiny instead of me taking control. It was like the one blind spot I had. And that is, for the longest time, for at least, and I'll be honest with you, almost 10 years, I've been working a job that I no longer love. It has become something totally different from what it was when I originally did it 20 years ago. And 10 years in, I just wasn't in love anymore. I wasn't helping on a big enough scale. To the degree that I'd be answering people's calls and giving advice for free anywhere, anyone who would take it, and writing my blogs and actually being true to myself, all while trying to work a job that I didn't hate. It was like a split identity.
Right.
And I reached the point in my awareness. I came to this seminar, and we went to the seminar together. It was a really good practice where I was able to collapse that timeline and just say goodbye to my corporate identity. And even though it's still, I'm in the beginning of this process. I'm in the beginning of the process of realizing that the help that I provide can actually be helpful and valuable, and that I needed to start being true to me as opposed to being true to what society said I need to do. Society says I need to earn a 6-figure plus income. Society says I need to do this and that. And I stepped away from that and realized that there's true value in helping others and being of service, and of rewiring our brain and wiring our brain for success and wiring our brain for getting rid of the fear. And so for me, what I've done recently is I've stepped away from my corporate job. I'm going to start designing a website. I'm going to start offering classes and coaching. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to be doing as opposed to what society said I'm supposed to do. So that's kind of where I am in my transition. It's still the beginning, but it's not the beginning of advice. I've been giving advice since I was 12 years old. I've been a life coach since way before then. So I'm ready to step into that.
Absolutely.
Whatever form it takes, however I can help.
So you're remembering who you are before the world told you who you were supposed to be.
Yes.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the types of, like you wrote a little bio, and talk just a little bit about like timeline coach and helping people, see their true identities. Talk just a little bit about that.
Sure. So what that entails is, a lot of the times what people don't realize is their stories are what creates their world. And so a lot of times they're dictating what is, and then they don't realize that they have that kind of power. So everyone really, truly is a manifestor. They just don't realize that they've been manifesting unconsciously instead of consciously. So a lot of what I do is kind of make the subconscious visible by listening to stories, and I can sort of hear timelines and experience in a totally different way. So for example, you could have someone, and I can say, oh yeah, that's from your past life, and you've no idea ancient times where this occurred, and all of a sudden they lose their fear because that makes sense. So that's one way I help. The other way I help is a lot of people is kind of finding those patterns, those generational patterns, because many of us have not realized that from the age of 0 to 7, we were these recording devices. We weren't actually kind of in there in judgment. We just recorded what was going on around us. So we inherited patterns that we have no idea are still playing. You know, the most common theme that I come up with clients, oh my goodness, I had no idea I'm my mom all over again, you know, or these ghosts in our machine.
Yeah.
You know, and so my services sort of help you uncover that, you know, whatever those are. A lot of people that come to me also are maybe already on the path and are just trying to figure out practical ways to apply what they've learned, you know. And then my most favorite are the people that are like, well, I've tried everyone else and no one else works, and what you got, you know?
What you got, girl?
Yeah. I love those moments because, you know, I'm not even trying, but because I can see them and see what they're doing and hear them, I think my gift most of all of listening really does help in that sense, because I provide a sort of clarity that kind of makes a shift. If everything is mental, all I need to do is help you make a shift, right? From the way that you're perceiving something currently to helping you see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And I do that a lot, pretty easily.
So it's not holding on to those old stories and like wearing them like a badge of honor. Those stories can be shifted and changed at any moment. We just have to be open to the thought that they don't define us, right?
Yes. Our biggest mistake is the funniest thing that we all do. Like, I would say 97% of the population does this. They look to the world outside and then let that determine their mood. That's backwards. We're supposed to remember that we're quantum in nature, and our mood is setting the tone outside. And if we don't take the time to set this tone during the day, well, the chaos that we may experience is due to not having a disciplined mindset of setting the tone during the day. And so it's a dance with yourself and your thoughts. And how do I take control of my thoughts? You know, again. But at the end of the day, it's mostly a game in falling in love with yourself in your true power and just really loving that. Because when you do, everything outside of you looks like you. And I don't mean physically, I mean your energetic signature. You know, it could be a complete stranger, but that complete stranger will say something that really resonates with your soul. And that continues to happen because the fortitude must be built within, and then it overflows outside. But if we don't realize we have this power, we're enslaved to the outside world instead of being its master.
Absolutely. Yes.
No?
Yes. I mean, I've, you know, I look back at my life and I think, man, I've created my reality in so many ways. I've been married, you know, before. And I remember, you know, I'm a pretty fun-loving, adventurous girl. And yet when I got married, I thought that there were a certain set of rules to being married, right? Like, This is what it's supposed to look like. And so I kind of like switched from fun date Nicole to married Nicole, because that's what it looked like to me, right? Growing up, those were my examples and, you know, the things that, you know, I watched other people do. And, you know, so, you know, I take full responsibility for marriages not working simply because
you stopped being yourself.
I turned into a bitch, just to be quite honest. I thought that was how it was supposed to be done, right? So we see these outside influences and, we you know, we take them on as ourselves, and then it's interesting. So now I've learned you know, to be, you know, girlfriend, Nicole, right? I'm in dating mode. And and how interesting that it's been a really, my marriage, of course, is still a work in progress, but it's been just really interesting just to watch the dynamic of, kind of, reverting back and forth and seeing which one really gets you a lot further ahead. Cause you can, you can practice these things, right? You can practice being different, taking different energies into a certain situation, and which result do you like, right? It's your choice.
Right.
And so if you like the result of dating Nicole in your marriage, well then why would I ever want to, do anything else? And so, I love that you have the opportunity to truly create your reality, right? It's all by the energy and the role that you're playing. Am I right?
Yes, it totally is. In fact, if you treat it like a game, even the biggest obstacle contains the greatest reward. And so a lot of the times what we do is we avoid the obstacle because it sounds like it might be painful, right? And so, but really, if everything is mental, then everything that we're projecting into the pain is our imagination. We're fearing our projected imagination rather than the actuality of what's there. And so, and so it's a demonstration of our light against whatever perceived darkness we're playing with at the time, and if we're not taking advantage of that moment to demonstrate our power, then it's gonna look like it overpowered us.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we're not able to do that. Like there's some kind of snap where we're like, no, we're taking control of this situation. And we flip back,
Yeah. I love it. So why don't you talk just a little bit? You introduced me to several things. You introduced me to mirror work. You introduced me to Wim Hof. Let's see what else. I'd already heard the Hapona. Is it Hapona? I never say that. Yeah. And so I'd actually done that prior to you talking about it. But talk just a little bit about some of those practices and maybe the ones that really that you love the most, and how they've impacted your life.
Yeah. So my biggest one is mirror talks. And the purpose of that, for me, I am kind of a subconscious mind specialist. And so I've studied symbols and symbology because that is the language of my subconscious. My subconscious controls 95% of the world outside of me. So if I don't like what I'm seeing, I need to use a symbol to bypass my reality. And one of those symbols is mirrors. They've been often used in our mother religion, or are, often as scrying tools and all kinds of things, but very rarely were they used like actual magic wand. And and that's what it is, because when you use a mirror to manifest something, what you're doing is you're bypassing your conscious mind and you're giving your subconscious a direct order. And then thousands of mirror neurons that are all over your brain just got the same message at one point in time. So if you really truly mean what you're saying in the mirror, it will manifest outside, but it's a subconscious tool that's a quick one to get whatever you want, whatever it is. That's one of my favorites.
So do an example.
So an example to me in the mirror, one of my favorites that I learned in The Magic of Belief. Perfect example. There was a guy who was hosting a party, and that was his tool, was the mirror. And he accidentally had a little too much to drink at the party, and he's supposed to give this presentation. So he saunters over to the mirror and starts talking to the mirror and reminding himself that he is 100% sober, that he has not had anything to drink that he cannot control. And he starts talking with some serious conviction. And you see this sort of wobbly man make an instant transformation. Just, and walks out and proceeds to give his toast and does everything. In the whole time it was done with a mirror. So that's one example. For me, I use the mirror in the same exact way. If I can't find something, you know, I just tell the mirror, I just found my keys. I found my keys. And sure enough, I find my keys. So it could be something as simple as that, or it could be more complicated. And by complicated, I mean to say that a lot of us don't harness the power of our self-love to the degree that we should. And so what ends up happening is outside of us, we receive the lack of what we're projecting. And that's what we have to wrestle with. So
Right.
that mirror, in this case, could be just as simple as, I love you. You are so beautiful. You know, you are just the most talented. No one can do it like you. Conversation that, you know, if it makes you cry, then you've actually succeeded in telling yourself something you really needed to hear. But the point of it is to bypass to get straight to your subconscious and your feeling sense. If it touches you, if it pulls at your heartstrings, if you've cried, you've just successfully created a moment that will appear outside.
Because it's the feeling. It's the feeling state, right?
Feeling. It's always the feeling.
Yes. Feeling. Right.
Yes. Feeling is the tool that bypasses rational thought.
Right.
If you can feel yourself rich, you will be rich, but most people can't hold the vibration long enough because then they turn to the outside world and say they're not rich, right? And then just destroyed everything that they tried to do with their feeling sense. So it's more of a constant connection of heart and mind coherence, always heart and mind coherence, because when the heart and the mind are connected, you have a whole nother field of possibilities that you would have never considered when you are stuck in a problem. We're stuck in a problem. We're stuck inside of an emotional box, and that limits our sense of whatever our reality is. And what's unique about this box is it has no doors, no windows. It's perfectly clear, and it looks like it goes on forever, so you don't feel trapped. But as long as you can't think outside of your problem, you are trapped. And so what's needed in those situations is a heart-mind connection, because when you have that, now you exist outside of that limited box, and you can use those ideas to transcend whatever you're in.
Yeah.
But the most important thing in that, I guess one of my other tools, I guess, is, you know, instead of the mirror, is also heart-brain coherence, because that's the realm of possibilities. That's your 5D world. That's where you want to get in. Yeah. And a lot of people are existing in 3D, unaware that they're also existing in 5D, and that the way in is when you connect your heart and your mind at the same time.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine. She was telling me kind of a way that she was raising her vibration. She had gotten a little bit down on herself, and so she was switching it. And she started listening to "Me Too" by Meghan Trainor. Do you know that song? Who's that sexy girl? Yeah. Okay. So she'd play that song. She'd blast it in the morning, and she'd look in the mirror and she'd sing it to herself and dance. And she said, you know, within just a little bit of time, right? She was singing that song, looking at herself, smiling, me too, you know? And she said it started changing her energy and the way she, you know, that little rut that she had gotten herself into. So it's so powerful to, I'm a big music fan. So music is vibration and energy. And then you get into the feeling of it, and you let yourself go, right? And you stay wild, child, right? Like, you know, it's that little girl who, you know, just wanted, you know, who thought she could really do anything. And it's remembering her, and it's bringing that inner child in. And,
it's reclaiming her, right?
Yes, exactly, right. Yeah, I loved that. And so I have this fun playlist now that I play often in the mornings. I would say at least 4 or 5 times a week. And I dance and I sing, and but I love your mirror work analogy. And I think that, you know, like affirmations, right? Is that kind of where affirmations?
So affirmations is another, like, the thing about what you just asked is kind of difficult for me to answer, because they all work. Okay. It's, what do you feel more comfortable with? A lot of people don't realize that they have a dominant gift Therefore, it's easier for them to do other ways, but it doesn't mean that certain ways don't work. It's just easier for them to get into, right? So with music or affirmations, you know, for me, affirmations were difficult because I would also look around, you know, like, let's just say you want to say something like, I am rich, you know? So you say, I am rich, and you say it over and over again. And then you look around and you just think, well, I don't feel rich, you know,
Right.
anymore. And you've done this, right? So what I did with affirmations is flip them around and made my mind do the work for me. So I called it like afformations instead of affirmations. And I asked the mirror instead, why are you rich? So instead of trying to fight my brain and the outside world, I make my brain do the work for me. So with affirmations, my only job when I ask, why am I rich? Why am I blessed? Why am I happy? Why am I whatever? It does the work for me. My only job then is to spot the examples. And that's a lot more fun than trying to convince myself of something that I don't quite yet believe.
Exactly. Okay. So I think with that mirror work, what I thought maybe that you were doing was, I'm trying to use the example that you used earlier. You know, I think it's more just about what, so you're grabbing the intuition of the message that you're trying to project in the mirror. Is that right? Versus like just a random affirmation. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And a lot of the times there's a lot that we don't realize. If we want something, it was already given. Mm-hmm. We only want it because we're that close in the vortex to perceive the desire. And so what we're supposed to do in these cases is not want them, not ask for them, because in the minute we do that, we're affirming it's not there.
Right.
That's why we want it. Right.
Creating
so
resistance.
We're creating more want. Instead, as soon as I desire something, I will touch my heart and say, thank you for whatever it happens to be that I want, you know, and I lose myself in the feeling of already having it. And 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening until it appears. And it always appears. And that's the thing that people don't realize, you know, your feeling sense is the most valuable tool that anyone will ever have, because it determines your wealth, your ability to get out of problems, your ability to survive a moment, you know, everything. It's all in the feeling, because your feeling is dictating how you're seeing the world outside of you. So if you're perceiving a sad lens, everything around you is going to be sad, because that's what you're pushing out. But what's happening is we don't realize that we're looking at it backwards, right? So we just think, oh, the world is this horrible place. Not our mindset is horrible, and that's what we're seeing, you know, right?
Yes. That's why I do not watch the news.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I don't want to attract those things into my life. And so it's getting into the feeling of gratitude. And, you know, I remember, you know, it was probably maybe 2.5 years ago. I had kind of gotten my place into, well, I hadn't done a lot of healing in subconscious stuff that I had going on, you know, feelings of unworthiness and, you know, perfectionism and, you know, some old shame triggers, things like that. And I hadn't gone in and really, I hadn't done the deep work, right? I hadn't looked at those things and where they were coming from and gone and healed them. However, I had been listening to Abraham Hicks, and she just kept talking about getting into the feeling. And if you can't get into the feeling, get into play, right? And so that was what I really did. I couldn't, like, I knew that, like, I still had those perfectionism. I still had those like control issues. And so I would get into that feeling of play, and, you know, I went out and I would just throw the ball with my dogs and just like love on them and be silly. And it wasn't, you know, I was probably still judging myself at the time, thinking, oh, you're wasting time by playing, you know, because I was still stuck in that pattern. However, it was always just like raising my vibration. And so, because I was in that feeling of play, and so therefore other things started to come, and it was pulling me out of those unworthy feelings, because I was changing my vibration. I was changing my way of looking at things, because life started to become more fun versus sitting there frustrated, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It ties back to Abraham. Abraham always says, you know, the most important thing you have to do is manage your vibration. Don't care about whatever anything else that's going on. And that's because as the source, you know, what you're seeing outside of you is always you. So it's like you almost have to make a conscious effort to manage that vibration in order to see what's going on. And for me, one of the biggest, most favorite things for me to do was to use the conscious mirrors to see what I didn't know I was thinking. That's probably one of my biggest, yeah. So that sort of, so for me, it's almost a backwards way of looking at things. If I take ownership of it, right, then I'm trying to find, if this person came to me for advice, I'm trying to find what pattern I have that I may be unconsciously projecting into the situation, so that I can fix both the person that came to me for advice and myself at once. Because the illusion is the person looks like it's coming to, you know, for me for advice, but it's really just doing me a favor and saying, here's what you're projecting, hon.
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left or so. So I would like, so I know, because I'm still very guilty of this, and I can get, and I would say generally, you know, I have this general, I feel like I'm in alignment, and I feel like I'm high vibing, and you know, I know how to, you know, switch some of those things through breath work or dance, or, you know, all the little self-care things that I do. However, there's still some days where I'm like, holy shit, like it just feels like you've gone like this, right? Contrast, right?
Yes.
And I know that you're supposed to appreciate the contrast, but at times your mind's going, screw this contrast.
It's really hard.
Yes. I can't take it. So, sorry.
Yes.
True though. I mean, yeah, I can have a pity party. So when you're in that moment of, you know, life sucks, or, you know, it's just, and now I'm looking, okay, I won't judge myself about it, but so it still happens sometimes. So tell me, do you have a tip on how to, on something that would like just really kind of stop that downward spiral mind pattern, something that you use that kind of helps pull you out of that?
Yes. Either smacking sounds or laughter. I do something to break up the energy. If I need to consciously picture myself stepping outside of the box, and this is a trick I do often, it's something I learned from high magic, and I just accommodated it into a brain practice. And so I would use this little symbol, like whenever I feel stuck and I really like don't understand what the heck, I've done everything I could, and why am I being tested like this in those moments? I take a little tool that I use. I picture myself inside a clear box, and on this light being inside this clear box, and that clear box actually represents the 3D reality we have outside, and I step outside of it. And in that moment, with that subconscious picture, I'm able to look at the movie of me without being actually inside of it. And that switch of perception helps me snap back into control, because then I can laugh at the situation from a bird's eye perspective, as opposed to when you're inside and you just feel trapped. But again, it's a mental tool that sort of helps us come to that realization. In a lot of the times, it really just helps to have a third party look at what you're feeling in the moment, because then we kind of help each other see. You know, like I had a great example of someone who just told me, we had a session and she just told me, but my father's never going to change. He's always going to be this way. And he describes this way, right? As an example. So as long as she believes that, she is manifesting just that. And there's nothing I can do to tell her otherwise.
Right.
So these are the examples in which you need someone to say, do you realize what you just said and what you just declared into being? And so it's almost as if it just helps to have a third party just kind of say, you realize what you're declaring into being, and knowing that that emotional guidance is there to guide us. The biggest thing is, like, when we start to feel crappy, you know, like not right, that's an indication, hey, Nicole, you're miscreating right now. You're going to create things you don't want. So I'm going to make sure you feel crappy for a second so I can snap you back into power. Hello, you know? And so it's embracing those moments and saying, my guidance is telling me something I need to pay attention to, because if we judge it, we get lost and get stuck. But if we say our guidance is telling us not to think this way because we're miscreating, and stop and breathe for a moment, we can get back into alignment. But if we don't, then we're misjudging, and now we're trapped. It's almost like the story of the Bible, you know, don't eat that from that tree of judgment or you will die. It's sort of a figurative and literal way of saying that whatever we emotionally connect to, we will create a box, and we will stay in that box until we can undo the emotion tied to it, sort of untether our soul from that.
Right.
And so when it comes to those moments, I embrace them, because it's like, I realized that what was happening is I was unconsciously slipping into a pattern that I'm used to that makes me feel bad. And this time I was aware enough in my guidance to catch it and use it as a stepping stone instead of repeating the pattern over again.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that tool. And you're right. You know, stepping into breath brings you into the present moment instead of living in the past or the future. And then the whole visual thing. I do that so often in meditation when I feel like I'm not able to just quiet my mind. You know, I'll walk through different meditation techniques in order to keep myself in the present moment. And it's a great little tip. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. Yeah. All right. So how can, I know that you're in the process of putting a website together and you're providing coaching. So I will make sure, you're obviously part of Stay Wild Child. And we'll include, for now, if it's good for you, include, you know, I'll tag you, obviously, whenever we post the YouTube link and all that kind of good stuff. And I'll put that on YouTube as well so that people can reach out to you through social media. It's a great way to connect with you. But so you're providing coaching at the moment. Is that right?
Yes, individualized sessions. For the most part, everyone comes to me with a different scenario, but my ability to step inside their box helps me tailor. So it's like kind of hard to define because everybody is in a different part in their journey.
Sure.
I'm just fortunate enough to be further along on the bridge, so that I'm able to look back and say, yep, I remember when I was there, and able to help. And it's not I don't mean to say that as like I'm better than anyone or nothing like that. There are times when I meet people that are further along on the bridge than I am. And so Absolutely. I use that as an opportunity to learn too, you know?
Absolutely. You are for sure further along on the bridge than me. And so often, I love the way, whenever I've asked you a question or about anything, and to me, I'm judging it probably as I'm even asking you, because I'm going, oh my gosh, this seems so immature. But you always come back with your cute little bubbly, wonderful personality. And you bring in so much insight into the situation, but then you also say, oh, I remember I would have probably reacted exactly the same way. So you make people feel so comfortable in their own skin. And that is something that I know that so many people are drawn to you, because you truly have this way of just, really making people feel really comfortable with who they are, where they are. And there's just like absolutely no judgment around it. And you deliver just great ways of how to take action. And I know that I've probably even asked you the same question I'm sure like 3 or 4 times, and you never say, hey, dumbass, you asked this question. You asked this question last week. You didn't learn it again. You're just, you're just always so graceful, always so graceful. And you're like, oh, I probably would have done the same thing. And, you know, here's maybe a way to look at it. And this is just your reflection. Oh,
Yes.
I love your grace and your bubbly personality. And I'm glad that we connected, and it's interesting how our paths intertwined, but I'm really grateful for the friendship and the just the person that you are. You're a real light to the world. Truly labeled light worker. That's you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll close this out. Do you have anything that you want to add just before we close out today?
No, only just to say this, and this is very simple. A lot of folks don't approach me because they're afraid that they're bothering me, and they're not. This is what I love to do. This is what I do whether I was getting paid or not. This is my joy, is really truly helping others remember who they are. And so at the end of the day, if you've ever hesitated to reach out to me because you think, oh, I have this silly little thing or whatever, don't, just reach out anyway. If I can't help, I'll be honest, but for the most part, I think I'm able to see through things pretty easily, and it's what I love. So don't hesitate.
Yeah. But there is an exchange for, time. And so you charging,
yes.
You charging is like, it's, I think that, yeah, you should.
Yes. No, I agree. Yes. And like I said, what I'm saying is just that I realize at this point, this is my life purpose.
Yeah.
And I'd rather do this than anything else.
Yeah.
So it's not a bother. If anything, it's training.
Right. You've so stepped into your why. Yeah, you're really a cool person to connect with and talk with, and I'm enjoying being a part of your life.
Thank you. Same here. I'm so grateful for you.
Yeah.
You've introduced me to so many things. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this wraps up episode 4 of Stay Wild Child. And we will put this on YouTube. And so the link will be coming out soon, so you can share it with your friends, and Cindy can share it with her group. And then also, it should be a podcast at some point too. I will figure it out, I promise. All right. So you guys have a great rest of your week, and catch episode 5. It'll be next Monday at noon Central Standard Time. Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you.